I get phone calls every single week from people who want to move out of New York and come here to Georgia. Even though we are on the same coast, there are huge differences living in the north versus living in the south. So, what exactly are these differences and which state might be better for you? Hi, I'm Sarah Maslowski, a local real estate agent right here in the Northeast Metro Atlanta area. And like I mentioned before, I help clients from all across the country relocate right here to Georgia. One of the states that a vast majority of our clients are leaving is New York. If you have decided to do the same thing, what are you going to need to know that's different here down south, as we say? The first major difference between New York and Georgia is obviously the weather. Honestly, that is one of the biggest motivations we hear from clients who live in New York and want to leave. They want to get away from all the cold weather. Weather seems like something rather simple that wouldn't inspire an entire move from one state to another, but we hear it all the time. People are sick of shoveling snow and they want to get away from long, bitter, cold winters. Many people who live in New York gravitate to Georgia as opposed to Florida for retirement because we experience all four seasons here, just with much more mild winters, and they like the variety, but they don't want to go from one extreme to another. You will have hot summers in New York, but the humidity is much lower, which means it doesn't feel quite as hot as it does here in Georgia. But have no fear, you can ditch your snow boots and shovels because you're not going to need them here. In fact, you can trade those out for flip-flops. All of the snow in New York means that the roads have to be salted, which can rust your car. This is crazy to me because you never hear anyone in Georgia ask, does it have any rust damage? We never hear that when buying a car because that is simply just not something that we have to worry about here. The salt on the road goes hand in hand with something else that we also don't have to worry about here in Georgia, and that is car inspection. In New York, you have to have your car inspected every year, and every time you buy a new car. Your vehicle is checked for both safety and emissions, and you get a sticker when you pass your inspection. And if you don't have this on your car, you can get pulled over and ticketed. For Georgia, this is comparable to not having an updated tag on your car. Here in Georgia, you can drive around an old beater that's falling apart with absolutely no problem. Now, there's a handful of counties that actually do have emissions testing, but they're very few and far between. I'm sure in theory there are benefits to not having absolute clunkers driving around, but that's perfectly legal here in Georgia. One of the biggest differences between these two states is property taxes. On average, you will pay much higher for property taxes in New York than you will here in Georgia. The state's average tax rate in Georgia is 0.92%, while the average state tax in New York is 1.72%. That is a huge difference. So for example, if you owned a $500,000 house here in Georgia and the tax rate in your county was that average of 0.92%, that would be about $4,600 a year in taxes. Now that same $500,000 house in New York with the 1.72% average tax rate would mean paying $8,600 a year in taxes. That's nearly double what you would pay here in Georgia. State income taxes are also higher in New York. Georgia has a graduated individual income tax with rates ranging from 1% to 5.75%. Compare that to New York, the state income tax starts at 4% and works its way all the way up to 10.9%. And this depends on your taxable income and, of course, your filing status. If you are interested in a deep dive on how taxes work here in Georgia, make sure you check out this video where I really get into it. Another thing you might notice about the differences between New York and Georgia is the home styles. That is one of the biggest differences that we have clients comment on. So up north, you're going to find older cities, which means more older houses as well. It's more common to see an old house in Georgia be 50 to 60 years old, where you can find an old house in New York that's well over 100 years old. You'll see a lot more older, almost Victorian style homes in New York than you will here. There are older towns in South Georgia where you can find this style of home, but it's much more common in in New York than it is here. A lot of these older homes in New York have a basement as well. Basements and cellars are very common, and many people who relocate down here are adamant about having one because they are so used to having all of that extra storage space. One big difference between basements in Georgia and New York is that most basements here in Georgia are daylight basements, meaning that they are at least partially above ground. You're going to walk out the back door and you're going to find lots of windows. While in New York, you're going to find that a lot of those basements are mostly underground and there's no windows. In Georgia, they are kind of partially underground lengthwise. So they're kind of built on a hill and the back of it just walks right out into the backyard. Does that make sense? This means that here you will see a lot more basements used as actual living space and not so much just for storage. A lot of times when people think of basements, they think damp and scary. But again, since most basements here have so many windows, that's not usually the case. In fact, I'm filming this video in my basement in my house right now, and there's a window right over there that I'm blocking out the light. One thing you need to know though, that since Georgia is such a humid state, you will find that sometimes basements can be damp. So you're going to see dehumidifiers running in most basements here. If you are touring a house and see that they have a dehumidifier in the basement, that is a good thing. It means they are doing a good job of keeping the space dry. We dive a little deeper into why basements in Georgia are the way they are in this video, so make sure you check that out for more info. You are also going to find that there are way more neighborhoods or subdivisions here in Georgia than what there is in New York. And by that, I mean actual clusters of homes together inside of one area where there's one entrance in and one entrance out. Not the use of the word neighborhood where it's a small town. We're talking about actual clusters of homes. In areas of South Georgia, you won't have as many neighborhoods or planned communities, but here in North Georgia, a vast majority of homes are in these actual neighborhoods. A lot of times people have a preconceived notion that living in a neighborhood means that you're going to spend thousands of dollars a year in HOA fees, which typically is just not true. And if you want more information on that, you guessed it, I have an entire video discussing HOAs and what you can expect from them here in Georgia. If you are planning a move to Georgia, you should just go ahead and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any of these videos and great information. Another big difference between the homes in New York and Georgia is that every home in Georgia is going to have central heating and air conditioning, thank goodness, whereas in New York, not every home has it and they might use window units instead. Here in Georgia, we cannot live without AC, and you can't really even obtain a loan on most homes that doesn't have it. Home prices are kind of hard to compare between New York and Georgia. So when we look at Zillow, it says that the average sales price of a home in New York is around $411,000, and then Georgia, the average sales price is $301,000. Obviously, the extreme home prices in New York City have a big influence on this, and they bring up the average sales price, while the southern half of the state of Georgia brings down the average sales price. So you can check out this video to learn more about what causes the major price differences in North and South Georgia. Of course, homes in New York City are going to be outrageously expensive, along with the surrounding areas, but it looks like there are more affordable areas throughout the rest of the state than there are here in Georgia. I mentioned it earlier, but North Georgia and South Georgia have vastly different home prices. You're going to find much more affordable homes in South Georgia, but in the northern half of the state, they are going to be substantially more expensive. Lastly, of course, a northern state and a southern state are going to have vastly different cultures, if you will. The dialect is different. Maybe you can hear it in my voice. The food is different. The phrases are different. Welcome, y'all. And the people are different. Of course, you also hear of Southern hospitality, and I take this with personal pride that just about every single client we have that relocates to Georgia from all over the United States, whether it's from New York, California, Florida, Texas, they all come back to me and say, Sarah, the people are so nice here. And it just makes me happy. Makes me happy that you're getting that really great experience. So another big difference between the North and the South is, along with that great Southern hospitality, you're going to have great Southern cooking. And I'm going to pick that great Southern cooking over the Northern cooking any day of the week. But I do think that we should give credit where credit is due. You can't beat a New York City bagel. I recently discovered that on a trip to New York City for the first time, and man, y'all have got some great bagels, and they just don't have that at the Dunkin' Donuts here. So what do you think? Are you living in New York and thinking about making a move to Georgia? If so, I would love to help you with that process. I want to be your agent. You can find my contact information right below this video, and also make sure you check out this video.